Sometimes the worst moment of your life becomes the beginning of something beautiful. We've all felt the weight of judgment, those piercing stares that make you wish the ground would swallow you whole. In Mesa Verde, Arizona, 1956, fiery-haired journalist Savannah Reed faced exactly that when ranch owner Lucas Blackwood stepped between her and an angry crowd, claiming her as his responsibility despite warnings that she was nothing but trouble. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun blazed across the dusty main street of Mesa Verde, Arizona, casting long shadows as Savannah Reed stood on the rickety wooden steps of the Mesa Verde Gazette. At 28, she had the kind of striking beauty that turned heads, copper hair that caught fire in the sunlight, eyes the color of desert sage, and a determined set to her jaw that warned people she wasn't to be trifled with. Her smart pencil skirt and crisp white blouse marked her as an outsider in this rough-and-tumble cattle town. But Savannah had never been one to blend in, even when it might have made her life easier. The Gazette office sat at the edge of town, a weathered, clapboard building that had seen better days. Its faded sign creaked in the hot breeze as Savannah tucked her reporter's notebook into her leather satchel. Inside that notebook were the handwritten notes that had the potential to append the entire power structure of Mesa Verde, evidence of water rights, manipulation that favored the largest ranchers while slowly choking out the smaller operations, and tribal lands to the south. Savannah had come to Mesa Verde 6 months earlier, fleeing a prestigious position at the Chicago Tribune after her expose on political corruption had earned her acclaim from colleagues but dangerous enemies among the city's elite. She'd chosen this remote Arizona town believing she could keep her head down and rebuild her career quietly. But old habits died hard, and within weeks, she'd found herself asking uncomfortable questions about why certain ranches always seemed to have water during the worst drought in decades. "Miss Reed," a voice called from across the street. Savannah looked up to see Sheriff Dawson approaching, his weathered face set in grim lines beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 50, Dawson carried himself with the cautious authority of a man who preferred keeping peace to enforcing law. "Got a minute?" Savannah straightened her shoulders, preparing for another thinly veiled warning about stirring up trouble. It wouldn't be the first. "Of course, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" "Word is you've been asking questions out at the Blackwood spread." The sheriff's voice was casual, but his eyes were watchful. "Lucas Blackwood isn't a man who appreciates journalists poking around his business." "I'm not looking to cause trouble, Sheriff." Savannah kept her tone neutral despite the prickle of irritation she felt. "I'm just following up on some discrepancies in the county water allocation records. Water talk is dangerous talk during a drought, Miss Reed." Sheriff Dawson removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. "Folks around here have long memories when it comes to outsiders who disrupt the natural order of things." The natural order of things. Savannah had heard that phrase too many times since arriving in Mesa Verde. It seemed to be code for the way powerful men prefer things to remain. "I'm just doing my job, Sheriff," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "The people have a right to know if something improper is happening with essential resources." Sheriff Dawson replaced his hat with a sigh. "Your job is reporting on church socials and town council meetings, not investigating the Blackwood family. Your boss Franklin might want to remind you of that." Savannah bit back a sharp response. Franklin Myers, the Gazette's owner and editor, had indeed hired her to cover local events and write the occasional human interest story. But he'd also recognized her investigative talents and had tacitly approved her deeper digging, at least until the pressure from advertisers had started mounting. "I'll take that under advisement," she said instead, gripping her satchel tighter. Inside were documents that suggested Lucas Blackwood had been diverting water from Rattlesnake Creek away from properties owned by smaller ranchers like the Martinez family, and the reservation lands further south. As Sheriff Dawson walked away, Savannah felt eyes on her from the storefronts lining Main Street. Mesa Verde was a town of barely 2,000 souls, and word traveled faster than tumbleweeds in a windstorm. By now, everyone knew the red-headed reporter from back east was asking dangerous questions. Savannah squared her shoulders and continued down the street toward her small rented room above the town's only bookstore. She wasn't naive about the risks she was taking. Lucas Blackwood owned half the county and employed a quarter of the town. His family had been in Mesa Verde since before it had a name, and their Lazy Bee Ranch sprawled across more acres than most people could comprehend. The first time Savannah had seen Lucas Blackwood had been at a town meeting about water rationing. He dominated the room without saying a word, tall and broad-shouldered in his worn denim and leather, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of Navajo heritage, eyes that missed nothing, and calloused hands that could break a wild horse or a man's jaw with equal efficiency. The women of Mesa Verde spoke of him in hushed, appreciative tones, despite or perhaps because of his reputation for keeping to himself and his remote ranch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rumors about Lucas Blackwood were as varied as they were colorful. Some said he'd been educated back east before returning to run the family ranch after his father's death. Others claimed he'd once killed a man in a fight over water rights, though no one could agree on when this had happened or who the unfortunate victim had been. What everyone agreed on was that Lucas Blackwood was not a man to cross. As Savannah climbed the narrow stairs to her room, she considered her options. The evidence she'd gathered wasn't conclusive yet, but it was compelling. Water that should have flowed to the south pastures owned by the Martinez family and further to the reservation was being diverted through a series of newly constructed channels that all led back to Blackwood land. The county records showed approved permits for irrigation improvements, but nothing that would explain the dramatic reduction in water reaching downstream properties. Her room was stifling in the late afternoon heat. Savannah opened the windows, hoping to catch a breeze, and spread her notes across the small desk tucked beneath the eaves. Tomorrow she planned to visit the Martinez Ranch to verify their water shortage firsthand, then continue south to the reservation where her contact, a young Navajo teacher named David Begay, had promised to show her the dry creek beds that once supported their small farming operations. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Savannah opened it to find Martha Wilson, the bookstore owner, standing with a glass of iced tea in her hand. "Thought you might need this," Martha said, offering the drink. "It's too hot to think clearly without something cool." "Thank you." Savannah accepted the glass gratefully. Martha had been kind to her since her arrival, one of the few locals who didn't seem suspicious of a woman who asked questions and lived alone. Martha's eyes drifted to the papers scattered across Savannah's desk. "Still working on that water story?" Savannah nodded, taking a long sip of the sweet tea. "I think I'm close to something significant." Martha's weathered face creased with concern. "Be careful, dear. The Blackwoods have been the law in this county since before there was a sheriff. Some say Lucas is different from his father, fairer, less prone to using muscle to solve problems. But he's still a Blackwood. Different how?" Savannah couldn't help asking, her reporter's instinct for useful information overriding her caution. Martha sat on the edge of Savannah's bed with a sigh. His mother was Navajo, caused quite the scandal when old Joseph Blackwood brought her home as his bride. Lucas grew up straddling two worlds, never fully accepted in either. When she died consumption, they said he was just 16. Joseph sent him east to school after that, but when the old man's heart gave out 5 years ago, Lucas came back to take over the ranch. "And the water rights?" Savannah pressed gently. Martha shook her head. "That's been a fight since before my time. The Blackwoods always controlled the headwaters up in the high country, but Joseph was ruthless about it. Lucas, well, People hoped he might be different, with his mother's blood and all. But he's not? Savannah asked, her pen poised over her notebook. I couldn't say. Martha stood, smoothing her apron. Just be careful, Savannah. Mesa Verde doesn't change easily, and those who try to force it often find themselves broken in the attempt. After Martha left, Savannah returned to her notes with renewed determination. If Lucas Blackwood was indeed diverting water that rightfully belonged to others, she would expose him, regardless of his family's power or his personal reputation. The next morning dawned clear and brutally hot, the sun already scorching by. 7 o'clock when Savannah set out for the Martinez Ranch in a borrowed truck. The road south of town quickly turned from packed dirt to little more than a pair of wheel ruts cutting through the sage-dotted landscape. The Martinez property came into view after an hour's dusty drive, a modest ranch house, weathered barn, and collection of outbuildings surrounded by pastures that should have been green, with summer growth but instead looked parched and brown. Miguel Martinez met her at the gate, his face creased with worry beneath his straw hat. Miss Reed, he greeted her, helping her from the truck with calloused hands. I appreciate you coming all this way. Thank you for talking to me, Mr. Martinez. Savannah retrieved her notebook and camera from the passenger seat. I understand this might be difficult. Miguel led her toward a dry creek bed that cut across his property. This is Rattlesnake Creek, he explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. For 3 generations, my family has watered our cattle here. Now look at it. Savannah stared at the cracked earth where water should have flowed. How long has it been dry? It started last year, just a trickle at first. We thought it was the drought. Miguel kicked at the dusty creek bed. But then we heard the Blackwood Ranch was expanding their south pastures, putting in new irrigation. Suddenly, our creek stopped flowing altogether. Have you filed a complaint with the county water board? Savannah asked, though she already knew the answer from her research. Miguel's bitter laugh told her everything. 3 times. Each time they send someone out who looks around, writes some notes, and tells us it's the drought affecting everyone equally. But the Blackwood cattle are fat, their fields are green, and our land is dying. Savannah spent the morning documenting the Martinez family's struggling operation, photographing the dry creek bed, the withering crops in their small garden, the thin cattle clustered around a muddy waterhole that Miguel kept filled with water hauled in barrels from town. You should talk to the folks on the reservation, Miguel told her as she prepared to leave. They've got it even worse than us. At least we can haul some water. Their grazing lands are completely dry now. Savannah nodded, her determination hardening. I'm heading there next. I have a contact, David Begay. Miguel's expression grew concerned. Be careful, Miss Reed. The tribal council filed a legal challenge against the Blackwood water permits last month. 2 days later, David's teaching position was threatened, and his brother lost his job in town. You think Blackwood was behind that? Savannah asked, though the answer seemed obvious. In Mesa Verde, Lucas Blackwood doesn't need to make direct threats. Miguel adjusted his hat against the punishing sun. People understand what happens to those who challenge him. The drive to the reservation took another hour across increasingly barren landscape. Savannah couldn't help noticing how the vegetation grew sparser the further south she traveled, despite being downstream from where water should naturally flow. David Begay was waiting for her at the small tribal community center. A lean man in his early 30s with intelligent eyes and the quiet dignity Savannah had come to associate with the Navajo people she'd met. Thank you for meeting me, she said as they shook hands. I understand it might be risky for you. David's smile was wry. Some would say speaking to you is career suicide, Miss Reed, but some things are more important than keeping one's head down. He drove her in his weathered pickup truck to what had once been the tribe's most reliable water source, a wide spot in Rattlesnake Creek that had sustained their small herds and garden plots for generations. Now it was nothing but sun-baked mud, This creek has never run dry, not even in the worst droughts my grandfather could remember, David told her, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Now our elders must choose between watering their gardens or giving their livestock. Enough to survive. And you believe Lucas Blackwood is responsible? Savannah asked, taking photographs of the cracked earth. I know he is. David pulled a folded map from his pocket. 3 months ago, I hiked up into the foothills where the creek originates. There's a new dam and diversion channel carrying water northwest directly to Blackwood land. Savannah studied the crude map he'd drawn. Is this construction legal? The county approved permits for minor irrigation improvements on Blackwood property. David's voice dripped with disdain. What they built goes far beyond minor improvements, but who's going to challenge them? The county inspector is married to Lucas Blackwood's cousin. By the time Savannah returned to Mesa Verde that evening, she had pages of notes, dozens of photographs, and a growing sense of outrage. The story was clearer than she'd expected. A powerful rancher, using his influence to monopolize water resources at the expense of smaller operations and the reservation, with the tacit approval of local officials who looked the other way. Back in her room, Savannah worked through the night, organizing her evidence and crafting the article that would expose the water rights manipulation. By dawn, she had a draft that laid out the facts in compelling, irrefutable detail. She knew publishing. It would make her enemies powerful ones, but the truth needed to be told. When she arrived at the Gazette office early the next morning, Franklin Myers was waiting for her, his usually friendly face grave. "Savannah," he said as she entered, "we need to talk." Franklin closed the door to his small office and gestured for her to sit. "I got a call from the Lazy Bee Ranch yesterday." Lucas Blackwood himself. Savannah felt her stomach tighten. What did he want? He wanted to know why one of my reporters was trespassing on his land, taking photographs of his water infrastructure. Franklin ran a hand through his thinning hair. He wasn't happy, Savannah. "I never set foot on Blackwood property," she protested. "I visited the Martinez Ranch and the reservation, both places where I was invited. Blackwood says differently." Franklin sighed heavily. "He's threatening to pull his advertising if we run any story questioning his water usage. That's 40% of our revenue, Savannah. The Gazette can't survive that loss." Savannah felt her face flush with anger. "So we let him bully us into silence while he steals water from people who can't fight back." "I didn't say that." Franklin held up a placating hand. "I said we need to be careful. Get more sources, more documentation. Maybe approach it from a different angle, a feature on drought management practices rather than an expose." "That would bury the real story," Savannah argued. "People need to know what's happening." Franklin's expression hardened slightly. "I hired you because you're a damn good reporter, Savannah. But I also warned you about the realities of small-town journalism. Sometimes we have to compromise. Compromise on the truth?" Savannah stood, unable to contain her frustration. "What happened to the people have a right to know." "They do," Franklin agreed. "But they also have a right to a local newspaper, which won't exist if Blackwood and his friends pull their support. Give me time to work on this, to find a way to run your story without closing our doors." Savannah left the Gazette office seething with frustration. She understood Franklin's position. He had employees to pay and a business to maintain. But the idea of delaying the story or watering it down felt like a betrayal of everything she believed journalism should be. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the group of men gathered outside the Silver Dollar Saloon until she was almost upon them. She recognized Wade Turner, the foreman of the Lazy Bee Ranch, his weathered face flushed with drink despite the early hour. "Well, look who it is," Turner called, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The troublemaking lady reporter who can't mind her own business." Savannah kept walking, ignoring the jeers that followed. She'd dealt with hostile sources before in Chicago. This was nothing new. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Turner called, stepping directly into her path. "Who do you think you are, spreading lies about the Blackwood Ranch?" "I haven't spread any lies, Mr. Turner." Savannah kept her voice level, aware that a crowd was gathering. "Now please excuse me." Turner moved closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "You've been telling people Mr. Blackwood is stealing water. That's a dangerous accusation in these parts." "I've been investigating discrepancies in water allocation," Savannah corrected, trying to step around him. "If Mr. Blackwood has concerns about my reporting, he's welcome to speak with me directly." "Oh, he'll speak to you all right." Turner's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "He sent me to bring you out to the ranch for a little chat." Savannah pulled away, anger overriding her momentary fear. "Take your hand off me. I'm not going anywhere with you." "You don't get to say no." Turner's grip tightened painfully. "Blackwood wants to talk, so you're going to listen." "The lady said no, Turner." The new voice cut through the tense silence that had fallen over the onlookers. Savannah turned to see Lucas Blackwood himself, standing at the edge of the crowd, his tall frame radiating quiet authority. Turner immediately released her arm, stepping back. "Mr. Blackwood, I was just making a fool of yourself and the—" Lazy B. Blackwood's voice was low but carried effortlessly. "Go sleep it off. We'll discuss your behavior later." Turner slunk away, and Blackwood turned his attention to Savannah. Up close, he was even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall. With broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked his land rather than merely owning it. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that studied her with unsettling intensity. "Miss Reed," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "I understand you've been asking questions about my water rights." Savannah lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite the nervous whispers spreading through the crowd. "I've been researching water allocation throughout the county, Mr. Blackwood. Your ranch is part of that story." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "A story you seem determined to tell regardless of the consequences." "The truth has consequences only for those who have something to hide," Savannah replied, aware she was being reckless but too angry to care. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Savannah could hear snippets of conversation around them. "That woman brings only trouble," someone warned loudly enough for her to hear. Lucas Blackwood's eyes never left her face, and to her surprise, his smile widened slightly. "My favorite kind," he said, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. The crowd on Main Street had fallen silent, watching the confrontation between the outsider journalist and the most powerful man in the county. Savannah Reed felt her heart hammering against her ribs, not from fear but from a surge of adrenaline. Lucas Blackwood's unexpected response had caught her off guard. "My favorite kind," he had said about trouble, the words hanging in the air between them. Before Savannah could respond, Sheriff Dawson pushed through the onlookers, his hand resting significantly on his holster. "Everything all right here?" "Just fine, Sheriff," Lucas replied without taking his eyes off Savannah. "Miss Reed and I were discussing her interest in county water rights." "In the middle of Main Street?" The sheriff's skepticism was evident. "Actually," Lucas said, "I was about to invite Miss Reed to continue this conversation somewhere more appropriate. Perhaps over dinner at the Mesa Verde Hotel this evening." Savannah blinked in surprise. Was Lucas Blackwood asking her to dinner? In public? The murmurs from the crowd confirmed she wasn't misunderstanding. "I'm working on a story, Mr. Blackwood," she replied carefully, "not looking for a dinner companion." "The two aren't mutually exclusive," Lucas countered smoothly. "You want information about Lazy B water usage, and I'd prefer to discuss it civilly rather than have you trespassing on my property or questioning my employees." "I never trespassed." 7 o'clock, Lucas interrupted, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "I'll answer your questions, and you'll hear my side of the story. Seems fair for a journalist committed to the truth." With that, he tipped his hat and turned away, the crowd parting before him like water around a stone. Savannah stood frozen, caught between indignation at his presumption and professional interest in the opportunity he was offering. Direct access to Lucas Blackwood was exactly what her story needed, a chance to question him face to face about the evidence she'd gathered. "I'd accept if I were you," Sheriff Dawson said quietly beside her. "Blackwood doesn't extend many invitations." "Is that supposed to make me feel special?" Savannah asked. The sheriff's weathered face remained impassive. "Just saying, opportunities like this don't come along often in Mesa Verde, especially for folks asking the kind of questions you've been asking." As Sheriff Dawson walked away, Martha Wilson appeared at Savannah's side, having witnessed the entire exchange from her bookstore doorway. "Well," the older woman said, unable to hide her amazement, "that's not something you see every day." "What? A rancher bullying a reporter?" Savannah asked, still bristling from the encounter. Martha shook her head. "Lucas Blackwood inviting a woman to dinner in public. In the 8 years since he returned to Mesa Verde, I can't recall him showing interest in any woman, let alone one challenging his business practices." "It's not a social invitation," Savannah insisted as they walked toward the bookstore. "He's trying to intimidate me, or possibly charm me into dropping my investigation." "Maybe so," Martha agreed, though her tone suggested she wasn't convinced. "But you're going, aren't you?" Savannah hesitated only briefly. "Of course I'm going. It's a chance to get his perspective directly, and possibly catch him in a lie about the water diversions." Back in her room, Savannah spent the afternoon organizing her notes and preparing questions for Lucas Blackwood. If he thought dinner would distract her from her purpose, he was sorely mistaken. She would be professional, direct, and unmoved by whatever tactics he employed. At 6:30, she surveyed her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. She'd chosen her most businesslike outfit, a navy blue dress with a modest neckline and crisp white collar, her copper hair pulled back in a neat chignon. The effect was professional but severe, exactly the impression she wanted to convey. The Mesa Grande Hotel was the finest establishment in town, which wasn't saying much for a place like Mesa Verde. Still, its dining room offered white tablecloths, actual silverware, and the only wine list within 50 miles. As Savannah entered precisely at 7, she felt the stares of the other diners. News of her dinner with Lucas Blackwood had clearly spread throughout town. Lucas rose from a corner table as she approached, looking transformed from the rugged rancher she'd confronted earlier. He'd exchanged his work clothes for a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his black hair combed neatly, freshly shaved except for a closely trimmed mustache, only his hands still bearing the calluses of daily ranch work, and the deep tan of his face betrayed that he wasn't some Eastern businessman. "Miss Reed," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "Thank you for coming." "This isn't a social call, Mr. Blackwood," Savannah said as she sat, placing her notebook prominently on the table. "I'm here to discuss the water rights issues affecting the Martinez Ranch and the reservation." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "Of course, but perhaps we might order first? The steak here is surprisingly good for a town this size." Throughout the meal, Savannah attempted to steer the conversation toward her investigation, but Lucas deftly redirected each question. Instead, he asked about her background, her education, her time in Chicago. To her frustration, Savannah found herself answering, drawn in by his unexpected attentiveness. "You haven't touched your wine," Lucas observed as their plates were cleared. "I prefer to keep a clear head when discussing business," Savannah replied pointedly. Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her with those intense dark eyes. "You believe I'm diverting water illegally from Rattlesnake Creek to benefit my ranch at the expense of downstream users." The direct acknowledgement of her investigation caught Savannah off guard, but she recovered quickly. "I have evidence suggesting exactly that, yes. What would you say if I told you there's more to the situation than you understand?" Lucas asked, his voice low enough that nearby diners couldn't overhear. I'd say that's what everyone says. When confronted with uncomfortable facts, Savannah countered, opening her notebook. The county records show your permits were for minor improvements, yet the construction observed by multiple sources goes far beyond that scope. Lucas's expression remained impassive. And if I told you those permits were deliberately misleading? Because there are people in this county who would sabotage the actual project if they knew its true purpose. Savannah paused, her pen hovering over her notes. What true purpose? For the first time, Lucas seemed to hesitate, as if weighing how much to reveal. The water situation in this county is more complex than a simple upstream versus downstream conflict. I'd like to show you something tomorrow, if you're willing. Show me what? The full water project, not just the diversion dam that your friend Big A photographed, but the entire system. Then you can decide what kind of story you want to write. Savannah narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Why would you offer to show me evidence that might incriminate you? Because contrary to what you believe, Miss Reed, I'm not the villain in this particular story. Lucas held her gaze steadily. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up at the bookstore. Before she could respond, Lucas signaled for the check. One more thing, he added as he signed the bill. Come dressed for writing. Where we're going isn't accessible by car. The next morning, Savannah waited outside the bookstore, feeling self-conscious in the riding clothes she'd borrowed from Martha, a pair of worn jeans, a checkered shirt, and boots slightly too large for her feet. She'd braided her copper hair to keep it from tangling in the wind. Lucas arrived precisely at 8, driving an open Jeep rather than on horseback as she'd expected. He'd returned to his rancher's attire, faded denim, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing muscular forearms, and a well-worn Stetson. Morning, he greeted her with a nod. Ready for a drive? Where exactly are we going? Savannah asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. The headwaters of Rattlesnake Creek, Lucas replied, shifting the Jeep into gear. About an hour into the foothills. As they left the town behind, Savannah noticed how the landscape gradually transformed from parched desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pines. Lucas drove competently but aggressively, navigating the increasingly rough terrain. Without slowing. You grew up here? Savannah asked, breaking the silence between them. Lucas nodded, his eyes on the rugged trail ahead. Until I was 16. Then my father sent me east after my mother died. Martha Wilson mentioned your mother was Navajo, Savannah ventured, watching his profile for a reaction. Martha talks too much, Lucas said, but without heat. After a moment, he added, yes, she was. Hannah Blackwood, born Hannah Begay. Begay? Savannah couldn't hide her surprise. Any relation to David Begay? My cousin, Lucas confirmed. Though he prefers not to acknowledge the connection publicly. Can't say I blame him. Savannah digested this unexpected information, realizing the water conflict had even more layers than she'd imagined. If you have family on the reservation, why? We're here, Lucas interrupted, bringing the Jeep to a stop at the edge of a steep ravine. The headwaters of Rattlesnake Creek emerged from a spring halfway up a rocky hillside, forming a clear pool before cascading down into the ravine. But it was what surrounded the spring that caught Savannah's attention, an elaborate system of pipes, small dams, and concrete channels that didn't match anything she'd expected. What is all this? She asked as Lucas led her along a narrow path to the spring. Phase 1 of the water management project, Lucas replied. Come see. For the next hour, Lucas showed her the entire system, explaining each component. The initial collection pool near the spring fed into a series of filtration tanks. From there, the water flowed into a distribution system with multiple channels controlled by mechanical gates. This main channel follows the natural creek bed, Lucas explained, pointing to a concrete-lined waterway. But we can divert portions through these secondary channels as needed. Divert to your ranch, Savannah said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Sometimes, Lucas acknowledged, but look at this. He led her to a small control shed, where a logbook sat open on a desk. Inside were daily records of water flow measurements and gate adjustments dating back 6 months. During critical growing periods, we prioritize downstream flow to ensure the Martinez operation and the reservation receive their allocation, Lucas explained, flipping through the pages. The Lazy Bee only takes excess during spring runoff or heavy rain periods. Savannah frowned, comparing these records with the complaints she'd heard. But the Martinez Ranch and the reservation both report receiving almost no water for months. Lucas's expression darkened. That's why I brought you here. The water is being released. Someone's diverting it before it reaches them. Who? Savannah asked, though she was already forming suspicions. That's what I've been trying to determine. I have my theories. Lucas closed the logbook. There's one more thing you need to see. They drove another 20 minutes along the ridge, eventually stopping above a hidden valley. Lucas handed Savannah a pair of binoculars. Look there, he said, pointing toward what appeared to be construction activity. Through the binoculars, Savannah could see earth-moving equipment, pickup trucks, and workers building what looked like a substantial dam across a narrow section of the valley. What am I looking at? She asked. Consolidated Mining's new operation, Lucas explained. They purchased land rights from the county last year. That dam they're building will create a reservoir to support their planned copper mine. And this connects to the water issues how? Their reservoir would flood the valley and contaminate the entire watershed with mining runoff, Lucas said. Grimly, including Rattlesnake Creek. The county water board rejected their permit application 3 times because of environmental concerns. Understanding dawned on Savannah. So they're trying another approach, make it appear that the creek is already failing, that the water is already being misused. Exactly. If they can convince the county that the watershed is already compromised by agricultural use, their environmental impact seems less significant by comparison. And they're making it look like you're the one stealing the water, Savannah concluded. Lucas nodded. Meanwhile, turning the Martinez family and the reservation against me, the largest landowner who might otherwise oppose their mining operation. That's why you've been secretive about your water system, Savannah realized. You're trying to catch whoever is tampering with the downstream flow. I have trail cameras at key points along the creek, Lucas confirmed. But so far, whoever's diverting the water has been careful to avoid detection. Savannah's mind was racing, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the situation. Why didn't you just explain this to the Martinez family? Or to the tribal council? Lucas's expression hardened. Would they have believed me? The Blackwood name has a complicated history in this county. My father wasn't known for his fairness when it came to water rights. And you're trying to change that, Savannah said, finally understanding. I'm trying to protect the entire watershed, Lucas corrected. If that mining operation goes forward, it doesn't matter how we divide the water, it'll all be contaminated within 5 years. They spent the rest of the day following Rattlesnake Creek downstream, stopping at several points where Lucas showed Savannah evidence of tampering, small, well-disguised dams that diverted water away from the main creek bed, channels that appeared natural but were clearly man-made, even pumping equipment hidden in brush near a bend in the creek. By the time they returned to Mesa Verde in the late afternoon, Savannah's understanding of the water conflict had been completely transformed. What she'd thought was a simple case of a powerful rancher abusing his position was actually a complex struggle involving corporate interests, environmental concerns, and generations of mistrust. What will you write? Lucas asked as he parked outside the bookstore. Savannah met his gaze directly. The truth as best as I can determine it. But I need to verify your claims independently. I need to see records, talk to county officials. About this mining operation, check property records. Fair enough, Lucas agreed. I wouldn't expect less from a good reporter. As she climbed down from the jeep, Savannah found herself reluctant to end their conversation. Despite her initial suspicions, she'd been impressed by Lucas's knowledge of the land and his evident concern for the entire watershed, not just his own property. Thank you for showing me all this, she said. It's given me a lot to think about. Lucas studied her for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Be careful, Miss Reed. Consolidated Mining has significant financial backing and political connections. They won't appreciate anyone interfering with their plans. I can handle myself, Savannah assured him, though the warning sent a chill through her. I believe you can, Lucas said with the ghost of a smile. Still, watch your back. This story just got more dangerous. As Savannah watched him drive away, she knew he was right. If Consolidated Mining was indeed manipulating the water situation to facilitate their copper mine, they wouldn't hesitate to silence a small-town journalist asking inconvenient questions, but she'd faced powerful enemies before in Chicago. The truth was worth the risk, especially now that she understood the full stakes of the water conflict. This wasn't just about fair distribution of a scarce resource. It was about the future of the entire valley and the communities that depended on clean water for survival. With renewed determination, Savannah climbed the stairs to her room, eager to reorganize her notes and plan her next investigative steps. The story had just become much bigger and much more important than she'd initially realized. Savannah spent the next 3 days buried in research, following the paper trail of Consolidated Mining's operations in Arizona. She visited the county records office, pored over property transactions, and tracked down environmental impact studies that had been quietly filed and then withdrawn when questions were raised. The picture that emerged confirmed Lucas Blackwood's claims. Consolidated had purchased land rights throughout the county, strategically acquiring properties that controlled critical water access points. Their permit applications for the copper mine had indeed been rejected multiple times due to concerns about watershed contamination, but each rejection had been followed by a slightly modified proposal and increased pressure on county officials. Most disturbing was what Savannah found buried in the minutes of a county water board meeting from 6 months earlier, a statement from Consolidated's legal representative arguing that existing agricultural usage has already compromised water quality and availability for downstream users, and therefore the mining operation would not substantially worsen existing conditions. It was exactly as Lucas had suggested, a deliberate strategy to make it appear that the watershed was already failing due to ranching operations, thereby minimizing the perceived impact of their proposed mine. Armed with this new information, Savannah arranged meetings with Miguel Martinez and David Begay, hoping to show them the evidence she'd gathered and possibly enlist their help in identifying who was tampering with the water flow. Miguel received her cautiously at his ranch house, his initial suspicion giving way to shock as she explained what she'd discovered. "You're saying Blackwood isn't behind the water theft?" he asked, studying the documents Savannah had spread across his kitchen table. "Not only is he not behind it, but he's been trying to catch whoever is," Savannah explained. "The water is being released from the headwaters according to legal allocations, but someone is diverting it before it reaches your property." Miguel's weathered face hardened with anger. "Consolidated Mining, I should have known. They've been trying to buy my land for 2 years, offering less than half what it's worth, claiming the drought would eventually force me out anyway. Have you noticed any unusual activity along the creek bed on your property?" Savannah asked. "Any strangers, equipment, anything that seemed out of place?" Miguel thought for a moment. "About 3 months ago, a surveying crew came through, claimed they were working for the county, mapping watershed areas. I didn't think much of it at the time, but they spent a lot of time down by the dry creek bed. Could they have installed diversion equipment then? Possibly." Miguel nodded slowly. There's a narrow canyon just north of my property line where the creek passes through. Perfect spot to redirect water without being noticed. David Begay's reaction was more complex when Savannah met him at the Reservation Community Center. Later that day, the revelation about Lucas Blackwood's maternal heritage clearly unsettled him. "I knew Hannah Blackwood was born Hannah Begay," he admitted. "But that connection has been uncomfortable for many in our community because of Joseph Blackwood's reputation?" Savannah asked. David nodded. The old man was notorious for using any means necessary to expand his holdings, including marrying a Navajo woman whose family had traditional claims to valuable grazing land. Many believe he used the marriage to gain control of those lands, then sent Lucas away after Hannah died to sever any meaningful connection to our community. "And what do you believe?" Savannah pressed gently. David sighed, looking troubled. "I was a child when Hannah died. I remember her kindness, how she would visit, bringing books and supplies for the children here. Lucas was different back then, quiet, watchful, caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. And now? Now he's a Blackwood," David said simply. "Or at least that's what everyone sees." Savannah pushed the documents toward him. "These suggest he's trying to protect the entire watershed, including reservation lands. That doesn't fit with the Blackwood reputation." David studied the papers carefully, his expression thoughtful. "If what you've found is true, it changes things. But convincing the tribal council won't be easy after generations of conflict." "What if we could prove definitively who's diverting the water?" Savannah suggested. "Lucas mentioned he has trail cameras at key points along the creek. If we combine that with investigation on reservation land, we might catch them in the act," David finished, a new resolve entering his voice. "I know this land better than anyone. If someone's tampering with water flow on reservation property, I can find the evidence." By the time Savannah returned to Mesa Verde that evening, she had the beginnings of a plan. With Miguel's permission to access his property and David's agreement to search reservation lands, they could work backward from the dry areas to pinpoint exactly where the water was being diverted. Combined with Lucas's monitoring of the headwaters, they might be able to catch Consolidated's operatives in the act. What she didn't expect was to find Sheriff Dawson waiting for her outside the bookstore, his expression grave beneath the brim of his hat. "Miss Reed," he called as she approached. "I need a word. What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Savannah asked cautiously. "I've had a complaint," Dawson said, his voice deliberately neutral. "Franklin Myers says you've been accessing confidential county records without proper authorization." Savannah stared at him in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. I've only viewed public documents that any citizen has the right to examine. Nevertheless, Mr. Myers has filed a formal complaint, and as a precaution, I need to search your room for any misappropriated documents." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Franklin had been unusually distant the past few days, avoiding her questions about when her water rights story might run. Now she understood why Consolidated had gotten to him. "You need a warrant for that, Sheriff," Savannah said firmly. "Got one right here." Dawson produced a folded paper from his pocket. "Signed by Judge Wilson this afternoon." "Judge Wilson?" "Any relation to the county commissioner who approved Consolidated's most recent land purchase?" Savannah couldn't keep the sarcasm from her voice. "I'm just doing my job, Miss Reed." The sheriff gestured toward the bookstore entrance. "After you." Martha Wilson appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "What's going on here?" "Official business, Martha," Dawson replied. "Need to check Miss Reed's room." "On what grounds?" Martha demanded, planting herself firmly in the doorway. While they argued, Savannah realized with a sinking feeling that all her research notes were in her room, including the evidence she'd gathered about Consolidated strategy and the locations of suspected water diversions. If the sheriff confiscated those materials, weeks of work would be lost, And worse, Consolidated would know exactly what she'd discovered. "It's all right, Martha," Savannah said, making the quick decision. "The sheriff has a warrant. But I'd like you to accompany us and witness the search." Martha's shrewd eyes met Savannah's, and some silent communication passed between them. "Of course. I'll just get my reading glasses so I can see exactly what's happening." As Martha disappeared inside, Savannah knew she was buying precious minutes. The older woman would understand the need to protect the research materials, but where could they hide them in time? The answer came in the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Lucas Blackwood's Jeep pulled up to the curb, and he stepped out, taking in the scene with one quick glance. "Evening, Sheriff," he said casually. "Miss Reed. Problem here." "No problem," Dawson replied, though his posture had stiffened noticeably. "Just following up on a complaint about some missing documents." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Missing documents? Sounds serious. Mind if I ask what kind?" "County Water Board records," the sheriff said. "Apparently some confidential materials have gone missing, and Mr. Myers at the Gazette believes Miss Reed might have them." "Interesting," Lucas said, leaning against his Jeep. "Especially since I was just at the county office myself, reviewing those same records. Didn't notice anything missing." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "This is official business, Blackwood. I've got a warrant to search the premises." "I don't doubt it," Lucas replied, his tone still casual, though his eyes had hardened. "Signed by Judge Wilson, I imagine, who happens to be Consolidated Mining's chief legal counsel's brother-in-law." Quite the coincidence. Martha reappeared in the doorway, clutching her glasses. "I'm ready to witness this official search, Sheriff." Dawson looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between his warrant and the unexpected presence of Lucas Blackwood, whose family had wielded significant influence in the county for generations. "Actually," Savannah said, inspiration striking, "I believe I can resolve this quickly. The documents Sheriff Dawson is looking for, I left them at the Gazette office this afternoon, in my desk drawer. If Franklin had simply checked there, he would have found them." Lucas's lips twitched slightly. "There you have it, Sheriff. Mystery solved." "I still need to check her room," Dawson insisted, though with notably less conviction. "Of course," Savannah agreed smoothly. "But perhaps we should all go to the Gazette first, verify the documents are there, and then proceed with the search if necessary. That would be the most efficient approach, wouldn't it?" The sheriff hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "Fine, we'll check the Gazette first. But I'm driving you there myself." "I'll follow along," Lucas said, making it clear this wasn't a request. "As will I," Martha added firmly. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the darkened Gazette office. Franklin Myers emerged from the back room looking flustered, clearly not expecting this late-night delegation. "What's all this?" he demanded, his eyes darting nervously between Savannah and the sheriff. "Miss Reed says the documents you reported missing are in her desk," Dawson explained. "We're here to verify that." Franklin paled slightly. I may have been mistaken about them being missing. In fact, I found some papers after I spoke with you, Sheriff. Probably the ones I was concerned about. Really." Dawson's flat tone made it clear he wasn't pleased about being sent on a wild goose chase. "Why don't we check my desk anyway?" Savannah suggested, moving toward her small workstation in the corner. "Just to be certain." Opening her drawer, she made a show of searching through the papers there, then produced a folder containing copies of publicly available water board minutes. Nothing confidential or incriminating. "Are these what you were concerned about, Franklin?" she asked innocently. Her editor nodded quickly, avoiding her eyes. "Yes, those appear to be the documents in question." "My mistake. Sorry to have troubled you, Sheriff." Dawson's jaw tightened as he realized he'd been manipulated, though by whom wasn't entirely clear. "Next time check more carefully before filing a complaint, Myers. I've got actual crimes to investigate." As the sheriff stalked out, Franklin turned to Savannah with a mixture of anger and fear. You need to drop this water story, Savannah. It's causing too many problems. What problems exactly? Lucas asked, stepping forward. Or should I ask who's causing them? Consolidated mining, perhaps. Franklin's eyes widened at Lucas's presence, which he seemed to notice only now. This isn't about any one company. It's about the viability of the Gazette. We can't afford to antagonize major advertisers or influential people in the county. Even if they're illegally diverting water and planning to contaminate the entire watershed with mining runoff? Savannah challenged. Those are serious allegations without proof, Franklin countered weakly. I have proof, Savannah said. And I'm going to publish it, if not in the Gazette, then elsewhere. The people of this county deserve to know what's happening to their water. Franklin's face hardened. That's your choice, but not with Gazette resources. I'm taking you off the water story effective immediately. Stick to reporting on church socials and town council meetings as you were hired to do, or find yourself another position. Savannah felt as if she'd been slapped, though the ultimatum wasn't entirely unexpected. I see, then I quit. Don't be hasty, Franklin warned. Journalism positions aren't exactly plentiful in this part of Arizona. Neither is clean water, Savannah replied, gathering her few personal items from the desk. And that matters more. Outside the Gazette office, in the quiet darkness of Mesa Verde's main street, Lucas and Martha waited as Savannah emerged, clutching a small box containing her typewriter, reference books, and photographs. Are you all right? Martha asked gently. I just quit my job, Savannah said, the reality of her decision beginning to sink in, or was fired. I'm not entirely sure which. Both, probably, Lucas observed wryly. What will you do now? Savannah lifted her chin, determination overriding her momentary doubt. Finish my investigation. Find concrete proof of who's diverting the water and why. The story still needs to be told, even if the Gazette won't publish it. Where? Martha asked practically. Without a newspaper. I have contacts at papers in Phoenix and Tucson, Savannah replied. If I can provide solid evidence, they'll run the story. It has regional implications beyond Mesa Verde. Lucas studied her thoughtfully. You're determined to see this through, even without institutional support or a steady income. The truth matters, Savannah said simply, especially when powerful interests are trying to suppress it. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, respect, perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Then let me help. I have resources that could support your investigation, access to locations, equipment, people who know the land. Why would you do that? Savannah asked, genuinely curious. This could damage your standing with people you've done business with for years. Because like you said, the truth matters, Lucas replied. And because the land matters too. This valley has been my home for generations on both sides of my family. I won't stand by while Consolidated Mining poisons it for profit. The conviction in his voice resonated with something in Savannah, shared value that transcended their different backgrounds and initial suspicions. All right, she agreed. But I maintain complete editorial independence. Whatever we find, I report it accurately, regardless of who it implicates. I wouldn't expect anything less, Lucas said with a hint of a smile. We start tomorrow at dawn. I'll pick you up at the bookstore. As he drove away, Martha turned to Savannah with knowing eyes. That man is nothing like his father. No, Savannah agreed softly. He isn't. Later that night, as Savannah organized her notes in her room above the bookstore, she found herself reflecting on how completely her understanding of Mesa Verde and its people had changed in just a few days. What had seemed a simple case of water rights abuse by a powerful rancher had revealed itself as something far more complex, a struggle for the future of the entire valley, with corporate interests attempting to manipulate long-standing tensions for their own profit. And Lucas Blackwood, the man she'd initially cast as the villain of her story, had revealed depths and principles she hadn't expected. His commitment to protecting the land, his willingness to risk his standing in the community by aligning with her investigation, his complex heritage that straddled two worlds, all of it painted a picture of a man far more nuanced than the stereotypical, powerful rancher she'd first imagined. As she finally went to bed, Savannah knew the next few days would be challenging and possibly dangerous. Consolidated Mining had already demonstrated their willingness to use legal maneuvers and pressure tactics to silence her investigation. With her connection to the Gazette severed, she was even more vulnerable. But for the first time since arriving in Mesa Verde, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond simply rebuilding her career or proving herself as a journalist. This story mattered not just professionally, but personally. The people of this valley deserved to know who was threatening their water and their livelihoods. And with Lucas Blackwood's unexpected alliance, she might actually have a chance to uncover the full truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. Savannah fell asleep with a sense of determination she hadn't felt since her days investigating corruption in Chicago, but this time, she wasn't fighting alone. Dawn broke over Mesa Verde with a golden clarity that only the desert can produce, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost ethereal. Savannah waited outside the bookstore, her notebook and camera packed alongside water and trail mix Martha had insisted she take. The desert doesn't forgive the unprepared, the older woman had warned. Lucas arrived in his Jeep, accompanied by a weathered man in his 60s whom he introduced as Charlie Redhorse, a Navajo elder and friend of his mother's family. Charlie knows every inch of the watershed, Lucas explained as Savannah climbed in. If anyone can help us locate the diversion points, it's him. Charlie acknowledged her with a nod, his deeply lined face impassive. Miss Reed asks many questions about water. Good. Water is life. When it speaks, we should listen. They drove first to the Martinez Ranch, where Miguel was waiting with David Begay, the unlikely alliance, a powerful rancher, a struggling small farmer, a reservation teacher, a tribal elder, and a journalist from back east gathered around the hood of the Jeep, where Lucas spread out a topographical map of the watershed. Based on what we've found so far, Lucas began, tracing the creek's path with his finger. Water is being diverted at multiple points, here, and possibly here. He marked 3 locations between the headwaters and the reservation boundary. Too complicated, Charlie shook his head. Waste of effort for water thieves. What do you mean? Savannah asked. Water follows the path of least resistance, the elder explained, his weathered finger pointing to a narrow canyon just north of the Martinez property. Here, one diversion here controls everything downstream, Miguel nodded slowly. The surveyors. I mentioned they spent a lot of time in that canyon. Then that's where we start, Lucas decided. Charlie and I will approach from the north. Miguel, you and David cover the south entrance. Savannah can document what we find. And if we encounter Consolidated's people? David asked. We observe and record, Lucas said firmly. This is about gathering evidence, not confrontation. They separated into 2 vehicles, Lucas, Charlie, and Savannah in the Jeep, Miguel and David in Miguel's truck. The plan was to converge on the canyon from both directions, approaching quietly to avoid alerting anyone who might be monitoring the site. As they bounced along the rough trail toward the northern approach, Savannah found herself studying Lucas's profile, struck by the quiet intensity with which he navigated both the terrain and the complex situation. Why didn't you tell me about your Navajo heritage when we first discussed the water issues? She asked. Lucas's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Would you have believed anything I said if I had? Or would you have seen it as manipulation, a convenient claim to gain sympathy? His honesty caught her off guard. Probably the latter, she admitted. Exactly. In Mesa Verde, I'm judged first as a Blackwood. The complexities of my background only matter when they serve someone else's narrative. Charlie, who had been silent, Until now, spoke from the back seat. The young eagle carries the burden of two nests. Neither fully his home, both shaping his wings. Lucas shot the older man a look that might have been gratitude or mild embarrassment. Charlie helped raise me after my mother died. He's fond of speaking in riddles. Not riddles, Charlie corrected. Truth is rarely straight like a fence post. More like a creek, it follows the land. They fell silent as the jeep crested a ridge overlooking the canyon. Lucas cut the engine, and they proceeded on foot, moving carefully through the brush. The canyon narrowed to barely 20 feet across, its walls rising steeply on either side. Rattlesnake Creek should have flowed through its center, but the bed was dry despite recent rainfall in the mountains. There, Charlie whispered, pointing to an unnatural arrangement of rocks midway down the canyon. Lucas raised his binoculars, studying the area. Clever. They've created what looks like a natural rockfall, but it's actually a dam with a concealed culvert pipe. He handed the binoculars to Savannah. Through the lenses, she could see what he meant, a seemingly random pile of boulders that actually formed a carefully engineered structure. A metal pipe emerged from the base, diverting water away from the creek bed and into a narrow channel that disappeared into the canyon wall. "Where does that lead?" she asked. "Let's find out," Lucas replied, his voice hardening. They worked their way down into the canyon, moving cautiously. Near the dam, they met Miguel and David approaching from the southern entrance. "Found something," David reported in a hushed voice. "The diverted water is being channeled through an underground pipe that emerges about half a mile east directly onto consolidated land." "And that's not all," Miguel added grimly. "There's machinery there, pumps and filtration equipment. They're not just diverting the water, they're testing mining processes." Lucas's expression darkened. "They're doing a trial run of their extraction operation, using the diverted water to refine their process before they even have permits." "We need photographs," Savannah said. "Documentation of the entire setup." "Already got some," David said, patting his own camera. "But we need to be careful. There are men guarding the equipment." They split up again, approaching the consolidated site from different angles to document the operation from multiple perspectives. What they found exceeded Savannah's worst expectations. A substantial unauthorized mining test facility using water stolen from Rattlesnake Creek. Worse, the runoff from their operations was being collected in a settling pond with no apparent environmental safeguards. "This water will eventually seep back into the groundwater," Lucas explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Contaminated with heavy metals and processing chemicals." Savannah photographed everything: the diversion dam, the underground pipes, the pumping station, the settling pond with its ominous rainbow sheen of chemicals on the surface. Most importantly, she captured clear images of consolidated mining equipment and vehicles at the site, establishing ownership beyond any doubt. As they were preparing to leave, satisfied they had gathered sufficient evidence, Charlie suddenly raised his hand in warning. "Someone's coming." They ducked behind a ridge of sandstone as a pickup truck with consolidated mining markings bounced along the access road toward the test facility. Two men emerged, one Savannah recognized as John Preston, Consolidated's regional manager whom she'd seen at town council meetings, and the other a stranger in an expensive suit that looked ridiculously out of place in the desert. Lucas tensed beside her. "That's Richard Harmon, Consolidated's vice president of operations. He's based in Phoenix. Must be important for him to visit personally." Using her camera's telephoto lens, Savannah photographed the two men as they inspected the facility, clearly pleased with whatever they found. When they stopped near the settling pond, their voices carried faintly across the still desert air. "Ahead of schedule," the VP was saying. "The county commission will approve the full permits next month. Judge Wilson has assured me there won't be any obstacles." "What about the Blackwood Ranch?" Preston asked. Lucas still controls a lot of influence with the old families. Harmon laughed dismissively. Blackwood is a problem that's solving itself. Our friends at the Martinez place and on the reservation think he's stealing their water. By the time anyone discovers otherwise, we'll have our operation fully permitted and underway. Savannah could feel Lucas's anger radiating beside her like heat from sun-baked stone, but his voice when he whispered was controlled. We've heard enough. Let's go before they spot us. They retreated carefully, returning to their vehicles without being detected. Once safely away from the canyon, they gathered to discuss their findings. This is bigger than water theft, Savannah said, reviewing her notes. They're deliberately manipulating the entire community, turning neighbors against each other to advance their mining operation. And they're conducting unauthorized mining tests using stolen water, Lucas added. That violates at least a dozen environmental regulations. The question is what to do with this information, David said. The tribal council will listen now that we have evidence, but Consolidated clearly has influence with county officials. We need to go beyond the county, Savannah decided. State environmental protection agencies, federal water authorities, and the press, not just local papers, but regional and national coverage. That will take time, Miguel pointed out. Meanwhile, they're moving ahead with their plans. The county commission meets next week to review their permit application. Lucas had been quiet, his dark eyes thoughtful. We need to force a public confrontation where they can't hide behind closed-door meetings and legal maneuvers. The town council meeting tomorrow night. They're scheduled to discuss water conservation measures for the summer. Perfect, Savannah agreed, immediately, understanding his thinking. If we present our evidence there, in front of the entire community, Consolidated will be forced to respond publicly, Lucas finished. And we'll have witnesses to whatever they say. The plan took shape quickly. Savannah would prepare a presentation of their findings, supported by the photographs and documentation they'd gathered. Lucas would use his standing in the community to ensure they were given time to speak. Miguel, David, and the tribal council would mobilize their supporters to attend, ensuring a diverse audience that represented all affected parties. As they parted ways, each heading off to fulfill their part of the plan, Savannah found herself lingering beside Lucas's Jeep. This is going to make you enemies, she said quietly. People who've been your business associates for years. Lucas's gaze swept across the landscape, taking in the harsh beauty of the desert valley that had been his family's home for generations. Some things matter more than business relationships. Some fights you can't walk away from. The intensity in his voice stirred something in Savannah, recognition of shared values that transcended their different backgrounds and initial mistrust. This man who had first appeared to her as a potential villain had revealed himself to be a principled defender of the land and its people, willing to risk his standing to protect something greater than himself. See you tomorrow then, she said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Tomorrow, Lucas agreed, his dark eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. As Savannah walked back to town, the setting sun painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, she felt a curious mixture of professional excitement and personal anticipation. The story was coming together, more complex and significant than she'd initially imagined. But something else was developing too, something unexpected and potentially life-changing. By the following evening, word had spread throughout Mesa Verde that something momentous would occur at the town council meeting. The small town hall was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. Savannah spotted familiar faces, Martha Wilson from the bookstore, Sheriff Dawson looking uncomfortable near the back, Franklin Myers from the Gazette anxiously scanning the crowd. Most notably, in the front row sat Richard Harmon and John Preston. From Consolidated Mining, their expressions confident, even smug. They clearly had no idea what was coming. Mayor Thompson, a portly man known primarily for avoiding controversy, called the meeting to order with visible nervousness. "We have a full agenda tonight, so let's begin with—" "Mr. Mayor," Lucas interrupted, rising from his seat. "I request the floor to address an urgent matter affecting the entire community." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lucas Blackwood rarely attended town meetings, let alone spoke at them. We have a scheduled agenda, Mr. Blackwood." The mayor stammered. "This can't wait," Lucas insisted. "It concerns the water crisis affecting ranches south of town and the reservation, and evidence of illegal activities directly related to that crisis." The mayor looked helplessly toward the town attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "Very well. You have 5 minutes." Lucas stepped to the front of the room, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. "I'm not here alone tonight," he began, gesturing to Savannah, Miguel, David, and Charlie. "We represent diverse interests in this valley, but we share one common concern: the truth about what's happening to our water." He turned to Savannah. "Miss Reed has been investigating this situation for weeks. I'll let her present what we've found." As Savannah moved to the front, she could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, skeptical, curious, hostile, hopeful. This moment would define not just her professional reputation, but possibly the future of Mesa Verde itself. Drawing a deep breath, she laid out their findings methodically: the evidence of water diversion, the unauthorized mining test facility, the environmental contamination, and finally, the deliberate strategy to turn the community against itself while consolidated pursued their true agenda. As she spoke, David and Miguel distributed copies of photographs and documents to council members and audience members. The room grew increasingly tense, whispers turning to exclamations of shock and anger. Richard Harmon's face had transformed from smug confidence to barely controlled fury. When Savannah finished, he shot to his feet. "This is preposterous," he thundered. "A collection of conspiracy theories from a disgraced journalist, a half-breed rancher with a chip on his shoulder, and people desperate to blame others for the natural consequences of drought." The slur against Lucas hung in the air like a physical blow. A hush fell over the crowd, all eyes turning to Lucas, whose expression remained impassive, though Savannah could see the muscle tightening in his jaw. "Is that your official response, Mr. Harmon?" Lucas asked quietly. "Because we have documentary evidence of every claim made tonight, including recordings of your conversation yesterday at the illegal test site where you discussed manipulating county officials." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Harmon's face. "You were trespassing on private property." "Actually," Savannah interjected, "your test facility is partially located on public land, as our survey maps clearly show. And the water you're diverting is legally allocated to downstream users, making your entire operation a criminal enterprise." "This is absurd," Harmon blustered, turning to the mayor. "I won't stand here and be accused by what?" Lucas stepped forward, his voice dangerously soft. "A half-breed rancher? Is that what you were going to say again, Mr. Harmon?" Before Harmon could respond, Sheriff Dawson pushed through the crowd. "I've heard enough," he announced, his weathered face grim. "Mr. Harmon, Mr. Preston, I'm going to need you both to come with me to answer some questions about these allegations." "You can't be serious," Harmon sputtered. "Do you know who I am? Who I know in the state capitol? Tonight, you're just a man accused of water theft and environmental crimes in my jurisdiction," Dawson replied evenly. "Your friends in Phoenix can sort it out later if they choose." As the sheriff escorted the consolidated executives from the hall amid a buzz of excited conversation, Savannah found herself surrounded by townspeople eager to share their own concerns and experiences. The story had broken open, becoming larger than she could have imagined. This wasn't just a local water dispute, but a potential statewide scandal involving corporate manipulation, environmental crimes, and corruption reaching into multiple levels of government. Later that night, as the town hall emptied and the initial excitement gave way to determined planning for the fights ahead, Savannah found herself standing beside Lucas on the porch, watching the desert stars emerge in the clear night sky. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now the real work begins," Lucas replied. "Consolidated won't give up easily. They have resources, political connections, and too much invested in this project. Tonight was just the opening salvo. You stood up against them publicly," Savannah observed. "There's no going back from that." Lucas's gaze remained on the distant horizon. "Some lines, once crossed, change everything. Standing with the truth is one of those lines." "Is that why you helped me?" Savannah asked. "Because of the truth?" He turned to her then, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "Partly. But also because you were willing to question your own assumptions. To look beyond the obvious story to find what was really happening. That's rare." "I almost got it completely wrong," Savannah admitted. "I was so ready to cast you as the villain. And I was ready to dismiss you as just another outsider passing judgment without understanding." A smile softened his features. "We were both wrong." In that moment, standing in the cool desert night, with the entire town still buzzing with the revelations they'd brought to light, Savannah felt something shift between them. Connection that had grown from suspicion to respect to something deeper and more complex. "I've been offered a position with the Arizona Republic," she said, the words coming unexpectedly. "They want me to develop this story into a full investigative series." "That's quite an opportunity," Lucas said carefully. "Phoenix is a big step up from Mesa Verde." "It is," Savannah agreed. "But I've been thinking. The real story isn't in Phoenix. It's here, in how communities fight back against corporate interests that would sacrifice their land and water for profit. In how people from different backgrounds can find common ground when something truly important is at stake." "That sounds like a story worth telling," Lucas said softly. "It will mean staying in Mesa Verde," Savannah continued, watching his reaction. "At least for a while." The smile that spread across Lucas's face transformed his normally serious features. "Mesa Verde has its challenges," he said, reaching tentatively for her hand. "But I've found it has its attractions too." As their fingers intertwined, Savannah knew with sudden clarity that her journey had brought her exactly where she needed to be. Not running from the past as she had been when she first arrived, but standing firmly in the present, fighting for a future worth having for herself, for this community, and for the land that sustained them all. In the months that followed, the alliance formed that night would face many challenges. Consolidated Mining fought back with legal maneuvers, political pressure, and attempts to divide the community once again. But the truth, once revealed, proved resilient. State environmental agencies launched investigations. National media picked up the story. What had begun as a local water dispute became a symbol of community resistance against corporate exploitation. Through it all, Savannah and Lucas stood together, the journalist and the rancher, so different in background, yet united in purpose. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their public fight, each discovering in the other's strengths and complexities they had not expected to find. When Lucas finally asked Savannah to marry him a year later, he did so beside the restored flow of Rattlesnake Creek, where water once again flowed freely from the mountains to the reservation lands. Their wedding brought together the entire community, ranchers and tribal members, townspeople and neighboring farmers, a living testament to the bonds that had formed through shared struggle. "That woman brings only trouble," they had warned. About Savannah Reed when she first began asking uncomfortable questions in Mesa Verde. "My favorite kind," Lucas Blackwood had replied, recognizing even then something essential about the copper-haired journalist with the unflinching commitment to truth. As it turned out, they were both right. Savannah had indeed brought trouble to those who would exploit the land and manipulate its people. And in doing so, she had helped forge something powerful and lasting in Mesa Verde community that had rediscovered its voice and its power to determine its own future. Sometimes the worst moments of your life do indeed become the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes being labeled as trouble is exactly the role you were meant to play. And sometimes finding your place in the world means being willing to stand against the current, like water finding its true path through the desert. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.